By the early 60s, Suzuki had gained a reputation in America as a brilliant researcher in the field of genetics. Despite better offers in the U.S., Suzuki decided to come home and to the province that 20 years earlier had thrown his family out.
We came to UBC then in '63. I was working on the genetics of fruit flies. I really had the bug that I wanted to be a big hotshot geneticist. And I've always felt that in science, you can't just do it from 8 to 5 days a week. It has to be total involvement. And of course, that was the great excitement of the lab.
He was just away all the time, and when I was actually at his lab once and the phone rang and I answered and I said, "Suzuki residence," and all the students and everybody were just howling with laughter, but you know, maybe I knew something then, right?
Go to the lab in the morning, come home for dinner, play with the kids, bathe them, put them to bed, go back to work, and come home 1, 2, 3 in the morning. You know, and often say, "Hey, Joanne, can you get up and make me something to eat? I haven't eaten dinner," and she'd get up and make me dinner. Well, it was a pretty crummy way of living, I think. At one point, she finally said, "Look, you know, you've been a professor now, you've got a lab, you've got a job. You've got to start spending more time with me and the family." And at that point, I just couldn't. The idea of spending less time in the lab was like ripping my right arm off. And so I moved out.
While Suzuki's home life was crumbling, his genetics laboratory at the University of British Columbia was fast building an international reputation. Students recognized Suzuki as a great teacher and flocked to his classes.
I talked in my classes about the social impact of genetics. I talked about the ethical implications and the fact that geneticists had an obligation to discuss this in public. And I found the students loved this kind of discussion. And they would come to me and say, "Well, what's this thing, eugenics? What's that all about? And you know, what about in Nazi Germany? What was going on there?" And I didn't know any of this.
A branch of eugenics advocates that through genetic selection, humankind can be improved. In the hands of the Nazis, eugenics meant racial purification, which led to the murder of people whose genes were labeled inferior.
I had never heard of eugenics. I'd never heard that there was anything to do with genetics and the Nazi race purification. I discovered that the kind of reasoning that had been used to lock up the Japs when the war broke out was being fueled by geneticists. There were two great passions in my life at the time. One was genetics, and the other had been civil rights.
While working in the United States, Suzuki had fought against racism directed at Black Americans.
The civil rights had come through my own experience being incarcerated as a Japanese Canadian during the Second World War. That my concern about human rights and my love of genetics came together in this incredibly grotesque way. I realized that this great activity that I loved, genetics, was filled with enormous implications, horrific implications for the rest of society. And for many, many months, I was absolutely paralyzed. I just couldn't bring myself to continue to do any research because I felt I was contributing to a body of knowledge that had potential applications that were enormous.
Suzuki realized that science was not neutral. It could be used for good or for evil.